Hello YouTubers, welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha and today I'm going to be looking at Red Dragon from 2002, directed by Brett Ratner of X-Men The Last Stand fame or infamy, a screenplay by Ted Talley, who was the original screenwriter on Silence but not on Hannibal. There the job fell to David Mamet and Stephen Zalen. Anthony Hopkins returns for the third time in the role, and this is a prequel to Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. It's chronologically it's set before those films, which is why I haven't filmed reviews for those films yet. I mean, talk about doing a Hannibal Lecter marathon. I feel I've been doing a Red Dragon marathon in and of itself. This is technically the fourth time I feel I've really talked about this story, if you include how I covered it in the Hannibal TV series, then the novel itself, and then Manhunter. So I'm going to try and not repeat myself by going over old ground again. You know, if you've seen the previous reviews, you must know the story by now. Will Graham, FBI profiler, he's on the hunt for the serial killer, the Tooth Fairy, Francis Dollarhide, this time played by Ralph Fiennes, and he enlists the help of Hannibal Lecter in his investigations, more so in this film than any other version. Here he comes, in and out. More so in this version than any other, this being a vehicle for Hopkins, and by this point in the franchise, Hopkins was very much the draw in the production of these films and the marketing. So a greatly beefed up role for Hopkins this time round. Well, at least compared to how the character was treated in Manhunter and how he's treated in the original source material novel as well. Odd choice of director, I have to say, for this film. Brett Ratner, who up until this point had done the two Rush Hour movies with Jackie Chan and I think a family comedy. No, yeah, Jackie Chan. Yeah, it is Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. A family comedy with Nicolas Cage, and I think another light comedy with Charlie Sheen and Chris Tucker. So, you know, he didn't seem the most obvious choice as director. You know, it'd be like if Jonathan Demme had... well, I suppose Jonathan Demme had come off of doing a couple of comedies when he directed Silence of the Lambs. He'd done Married to the Mob and Something Wild. So maybe that was the thinking behind the choice, is you know, this guy, Jonathan Demme, was a charismatic young director who wanted to do something different. Maybe Ratner would yield similar results. Yeah, thinking about it, maybe it wasn't that odd a choice, but I still think this material is... I mean, Demme did go on after Silence to do a few more serious, sort of weightier thriller type films. So, and I think Demme is an auteur in his own respect, sadly missed. I would have preferred, I think, this film to be in safer hands, to being in the hands of a more safer bet as a filmmaker, you know, a Scorsese type. I don't know who off the top of my head. Certainly, I mean, I've watched the special features on this, which they are plentiful. I think this is, if you're a fan of this series, you know, the makings of, you're best served by this DVD, because it's there's a whole disc of special features on this, on the making of Brett Ratner's video diaries, copious amounts of deleted scenes and screen tests, and two feature commentaries, one from Ratner and Ted Talley, and one from Danny Elfman, who did the score around. I think I've said before, I'm not a big fan of Danny Elfman, and I think he was an odd choice for the composer as well. You know, they seem to go for a very light touch with from the people they hired, the Laurentises who produced the movie this time around, hiring people like Ratner and Danny Elfman, who's primarily known for doing Tim Burton movies. You know, that's what you hire Danny Elfman for. You hire him for Beetlejuice. You hire him for the light, spooky comedy, the comedy with a slightly darker edge. So giving the reins of the score to him, you know, gives the proceedings in Hannibal a lightness of touch that it didn't have before. But you know, having watched all the special features on this and heard Ratner talk about the making of the film, and I did watch. I can remember watching the special features on the Rush Hour movies as well. I mean, I can see why he initially got a lot of work in the industry, just because he talks a good game. You know, he does talk like an auteur. He talks like a competent filmmaker, a filmmaker who knows what he's doing and can get things done. But ultimately, you're going to be what bears up. It isn't your talk. It isn't your game. It's the work you produce. And Brett Ratner is just a director that produces mediocre pictures. You know, after this, he did go on to do X-Men: The Last Stand, but that was, well, at the time it was considered to be an inferior work to the first two X-Men movies and paled in comparison next to the Bryan Singer versions. Also, interestingly, on this, he talks briefly about how he's going to do Superman, how he's going to, when the Grahams go and hide out in the rural location, that he's going to reuse that location for Smallville when he does Superman. And then, interestingly enough, he went on to take over from Bryan Singer to do X-Men: The Last Stand, and Bryan Singer went on to do Superman. So it's funny how these little projects become a little incestuous at times in Hollywood. They sort of pass from around the same pool of directors who are considered hot at the time. So a little tangent there. So yeah, this is definitely the lightest, the most lightweight of all the Lecter pictures. I mean, this is apart from a pre-credit sequence, which isn't in the book, which is just alluded to in the book, where we actually see Graham capture Lecter back in Baltimore in 1980, and they make a decision to give Lecter a little ponytail. Odd little choice there, you know. I never really thought of Hannibal Lecter to wear something that naff. But it's the only time you really see him out of prison. So you never... For the rest of the film, he's kind of emasculated as a character. And he's never really in a position to do anything that horrific. Although, you know, as a character, he can obviously still use his smarts to orchestrate things from the outside world. You know, he still gets his hands on a telephone and manages to give Francis Dolarhyde, the main antagonist, Graham's home address. But you know, apart from an early dinner party scene, which goes for high camp rather than horror, he's never really seen doing anything that horrific in this film. I mean, I can kind of understand them wanting to go the lighter route, because I mean, what you've got to remember is this film came out. It was like a summer 2002 or an autumn 2002 release. So the West was really still reeling from 9/11 at the time, and if you remember, back then, you know, the cinema landscape was the films that were doing well were at the box office were the light escapist stuff. You know, it's no surprise that The Lord of the Rings was the biggest film at the time, because I think that the cinema goers at the time just needed something a bit escapist, a bit of fun. They didn't want anything too challenging in the cinema. So you do get, by virtue of that, of appealing to the cinema audience of the time, you do get a kind of a film that is probably more lightweight in tone than it probably would have been if it had been made, I don't know, 5 years previously, or even in 2 or 3 years previously. Like, you know, Hannibal itself is a much darker film than this. Unfortunately, I think that holds this back from really being a classic. I think this film, if it hadn't been in a trilogy of films that had started off with a classic film, this film would have been much more largely forgotten now. It's only sitting on people's DVD shelves now, like mine, because it's a completist thing. I mean, the film, it does have a good script, you know. Ted Talley, who wrote the screenplay, he had certain moral objections, as did Jonathan Demme, to the Hannibal novel, which is why he didn't choose to script that. But he was the ideal choice, really, to do the Red Dragon screenplay, because he did such a good job on Silence of the Lambs. And it's a shame they didn't manage to coax Jonathan Demme back, because I think Demme would have really gone to town on this material in the same way that he did with Silence. It packs in a lot more from the novel than Manhunter did. You know, you get the inclusions of scenes, especially with the treatment of Dollarhide, who, I mean, this film becomes much more Dollarhide's story, than, you know, if Manhunter was Graham's story, this is Dollarhide's story, really. And so we get much more scenes from the novel, you know, with him eating the William Blake painting, and a more in-depth look at his relationship with Reba, and more of his psychological demons coming to the fore. You know, the relationship he had with his grandmother, and the relationship he has with the painting that he's imbued with anthropomorphic qualities. That comes much more to the fore in this. But you know, but even a great writer, sadly, I think needs a great director to really realise the work, like a Demme type, and sadly you don't get that really with the director of Rush Hour 2. And the film does have a great cast as well. I mean, just look at the names on the credits here, you know. Anthony Hopkins, Edward Norton, Ralph Fiennes, Harvey Keitel, Emma Watson, Mary Louise Parker, not quite sure what she's doing on there, not quite sure who she is, and Philip Seymour Hoffman, the greatly missed Philip Seymour Hoffman. What a cast, you know, of all the films. I mean, this one is the finest rogues gallery of players. Interesting enough, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, who, like I say, sadly missed. You know, I was a big fan of his. He wanted to play Dollarhide, and I think that would have been a really interesting way to go, especially if you've watched Mission Impossible 3, and because he plays the villain in that, and it kind of makes sense, because I thought, wow, that's he made the villain in that far more sinister and scary than I thought a spy movie villain had any right to be. And it kind of makes sense now, learning that he wanted to play Dollarhide, that you know, I think his portrayal in Mission Impossible 3 may have been a lot of what he wanted to get out in his portrayal of Dolarhyde in this. But I mean, he makes a perfectly serviceable Freddie Lounds, and Ray Fiennes is great in the role as well. You know, I like in Manhunter. The scenes of Reba and Dolarhyde that's where the film really comes alive for me. You know, you go from Ed Norton and Harvey Keitel, and their scenes are good and serviceable, but you know, I kind of get the impression they weren't really given the most in-depth direction from Brett Ratner. But there seems, whenever it cuts to Ray Fiennes and Emily Watson, the film just sort of elevates for me. You know, you get when you get that meatier, there's just more there for an actor to play with. You know, I'm not going to say it's because they're British and it's because they're from a theatre tradition or whatever that those scenes are elevated. But it does seem almost like two different movies to me in one. A bog standard police procedural, like a James Patterson adaptation, and then at the same time this really dense, well thought out, thoughtful character study about a monster trying to redeem his soul, and the angel trying to redeem his soul. Oddly enough, of this great cast, the one weak link for me is sadly Hopkins himself. You know, and don't get me wrong, he's still as entertaining as ever in the role. But I think that in a way that's part of the problem, is that he's there for entertainment value now. He's there because the audience love him. He's become everyone's favourite serial killer. They made him too cuddly in a thing. I mean, as I say, it's not helped by the fact that he is incarcerated for 95% of his screen time in this. But more than that, you know, in the novel, he's only in one scene. The novel was just the first time he was used. He's in one scene, and then he's sort of alluded to in a few other scenes, and there's a point where he writes a letter to Graham. Obviously, this time around, you know, the letter becomes a whole scene. But then Tally has written a couple of more scenes, a couple of more times that Graham goes to visit Lecter. And they're not badly written scenes. I mean, I think having had the fortune to write the Silence of the Lambs screenplay, he's got used to writing in that voice, so he can write original scenes. But unfortunately, this time around, I totally understand why they did this, but they feel the need to copy the beats of Silence of the Lambs with the Lecter character, having him show up at the same points in the screenplay. But whereas in the Silence of the Lambs, you know, Thomas Harris had obviously fought through that plot, and Hannibal Lecter is an integral part of that plot. Here, he almost feels crowbarred in. You know, his scenes aren't as revelatory as they are in Silence, and so therefore he becomes he feels more superfluous. He feels more crowbarred in. You know, never not entertaining. Not as scary as he is in Silence. I think he's missing the. I don't know. There's a more sort of realistic sheen to Silence. It feels much more real somehow. And here the look of the film and you know, the 12 years aging on Hannibal, even though this is only meant to be set 6 months prior to Silence or whatever, has sort of subdued his performance in a way. So definitely the least successful handling of the Hannibal character of the three films in this, sadly. But you know, more than made up for from Ray Fiennes' performance. You know, if you're looking for a great monster, a great serial killer, yeah, a very three-dimensional serial killer character. Yeah, crowbarred in. Yeah, that's all. That's all I got to say, really. You know, there you go. 4 videos on pretty much or 3.5 videos on pretty much the same story. I've run out of things to say. There's not much else, you know. Just to sum up and say, this is. It's not a bad little thriller. It's not a bad film at all, you know. It does have a good script and a great cast, but it does have a mediocre direction. You know, all the elements were there, if you ask me, for to make a classic, you know, and something that at least attempted to rival Silence. But yeah. It's just unfortunate this. I feel this could have been great, and it's just okay in my view. You know, not awful. You know, perfectly serviceable and entertaining. But I like to be blown away by cinema, and films like Silence of the Lambs do that for me. This film doesn't. So there you go. That's my Red Dragon review down. Join me next time, folks, and I will be reviewing, finally on to Silence of the Lambs. I'm going to be reviewing the novel first and then the film, so join me for those 2 videos. And until next time, folks, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, and I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.